My name is Marla Jensen. I'm 53 years old, and until a few weeks ago, I was the senior site supervisor at one of the largest commercial construction projects in Billings, Montana. I've spent over 3 decades of my life on job sites. Rain, snow, heat didn't matter. I worked my way up from apprentice to supervisor the old-fashioned way. Long hours, busted knuckles, and doing things by the book even when it slowed things down. That's what got results that lasted. Or at least, that's what I believed. I guess I didn't see the writing on the wall, or maybe I just didn't want to believe it. Ever since Gregory Stein, the founder of Driftline Construction, retired and handed the company off to his son, everything started to shift. Quality turned into quantity. Schedules got tighter, corners got cut, and people like me, who pushed back, who asked questions, started feeling like we didn't belong anymore. Then came him, Justin Hawkins, 30 years old, MBA, wore polished boots that had never seen mud, carried a tablet like it was a weapon. He walked onto the Riverview site like he owned it, barely introduced himself to the crew, and talked more about maximizing timelines than safety compliance. First week, I flagged a support issue on the 3rd floor. Those temporary braces weren't secure. Anyone with field experience could see it. I told him we needed reinforcement before continuing. He didn't even look up from his screen, just muttered something about the engineers signing off and to keep things moving. A week later, he had me in the trailer with HR on speaker. "Marla," he said, leaning back in that fake leather chair like some TV villain. "We need more agile leadership on site. Your hesitations are slowing things down. Let's face it, this isn't your era anymore." That was it. 30 years, gone in a 10-minute conversation. No notice, no warning, just a box with my name on it waiting outside. They'd already packed my things. Even my personal drill set was missing. A security guard walked me to my truck like I was a threat. The crew didn't even know what was happening. I nodded at them as I passed, trying to keep my composure. But inside something broke. It wasn't just the job. It was being tossed aside like I'd never mattered, like experience had an expiration date. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. But I promised myself, sitting there behind the wheel with that cardboard box on the passenger seat, that this wouldn't be the end of my story. I sat in my truck for over an hour that day. Didn't start the engine. Didn't even move. Just stared at the box on the seat next to me like it held the answer to how 30 years of loyalty could vanish in a blink. I wasn't crying. I felt numb, like I'd just walked out of a funeral. Only the casket had my career in it. Getting escorted off-site like a threat? That was the part that stung the most. Not even a handshake. Not a single look of thanks. Just a security guard who didn't want to meet my eyes, and a young man in a tailored coat calling me resistant to change. But you know what's funny? As I sat there, something shifted. At first, it was anger. Deep, quiet, boiling kind of anger. But then, underneath it, I felt something else rise. Clarity. I had never once cut corners. I'd stood up when it mattered. I'd warned them, again and again, about those violations. The bolts on the 5th floor that didn't match spec, the low-grade concrete in the foundation, the missing fire seals around electrical risers. I had documented everything because I knew this would happen someday. I just never thought it would. Come this fast, or this dirty. I reached into my glove compartment and pulled out my personal phone. No work device, just my own. Opened my email. There it was. Folder after folder labeled by date and floor level. Photos of cracks in poured concrete, PDF copies of material invoices that didn't match what was delivered. Voice memos of meetings where I'd raised concerns, only to be brushed off. There were 76 separate entries. Each one backed up with evidence. Each one ignored or buried. I didn't collect that information to cover my own back. At the time, I truly believed someone up the chain would care. That integrity meant something. Turns out I was wrong. But staring at all that proof in my inbox, I realized something. I wasn't the problem. I was the only one trying to keep people safe, and they fired me for it. I closed my eyes for a second and let that sink in. They wanted me to feel small, disposable, outdated. But all they really did was remind me how rare it is to have a spine in this business. And that, maybe, just maybe, I wasn't done fighting yet. The next morning, I woke up earlier than I had since getting fired, and brewed a pot of coffee like it was war fuel. My hands were steady, my mind sharper than it had been in weeks. There was no boss watching, no deadlines, no walkie-talkie going off in my ear. Just me, my laptop, and over 70 pieces of evidence that Driftline Construction had willingly compromised public safety to meet a damn deadline. I didn't even hesitate. I created a brand new email account, attached every file I had, and drafted a detailed message to OSHA with the subject line: Urgent. Systematic safety violations at Riverview Complex. I didn't stop there. I copied the entire report to the Montana State Building Inspector's office. Then I sat back, finished my coffee, and waited for the world to start spinning a little differently. What I didn't expect, what caught me completely off guard, was the call I got that afternoon. Gregory Stein. Yes, that Gregory Stein. The retired founder of Driftline Construction. The man who used to walk job sites in work boots and flannel, who once told me to my face that shortcuts only lead to sinkholes. His voice was gravelly, tired but steady. "Marla," he said, "we need to talk, and not on the phone." We met that night at a lake cabin outside of Billings. No one around but the wind and the water. He didn't beat around the bush. He told me he knew things had gone south the moment he handed the company over to his son, Thomas. He wanted growth, Gregory said, staring out at the lake. Didn't care what it cost. And now, I'm hearing whispers I can't ignore. Turns out Gregory had been collecting his own files, emails about political donations made just before the Riverview zoning was fast-tracked. Memos from executives referencing forged materials testing, invoices that didn't match supplier records. I sat there stunned as he laid it all out. "I didn't build this company to become a coffin factory," he said quietly, "and I won't let it die that way." Then, as if the floodgates had opened, more came forward. Frank, my old electrical foreman, met me 2 days later in the back booth of a diner, checking over his shoulder before handing me a flash drive. "They're trying to fix things before the inspection, Marla," he said. "But it's worse than you thought. Donna's been tracking the paperwork. The concrete? Never passed testing. They just changed the reports." That's when I knew. This wasn't about getting revenge. It wasn't even about getting my job back. This was about stopping something truly dangerous before it was too late. Driftline wasn't just sloppy. They were covering up a crime. And now they'd made the mistake of thinking I'd walk away quietly. It didn't take long for Driftline to realize the hornet's nest they'd kicked. Less than 72 hours after I sent that report to OSHA and the state inspector, I got a knock at my door, courier delivery, thick envelope, law firm logo I recognized instantly. Inside was a cease and desist letter accusing me of defamation, malicious interference, and, this one actually made me laugh out loud, theft of intellectual property. According to them, I had stolen confidential construction data when I walked off the site. Apparently, documenting safety violations on my own phone and keeping records in my personal cloud was now considered corporate espionage. It was textbook intimidation, designed to make me panic, shut up, and disappear. What they didn't expect was that I'd already spoken to a lawyer friend, pro bono, an old union guy, who told me to keep everything and say nothing until they made a real move. So I waited, quiet, calm, ready. Then came the call. I was sipping tea at my kitchen table when my phone rang. Justin Hawkins. I knew that smarmy tone before he even said his name. "Marla," he started, like we were old friends. "Look, I know. Things got heated. But I wanted to reach out. We're all under a lot of pressure, and maybe we overreacted. There's no reason this has to get uglier. I didn't say a word, just let him ramble. He went on about how Driftline was reevaluating leadership, how maybe there'd be room for me to consult on future projects, and how the industry's small. Marla, you don't want to burn bridges. That's when he dropped the real reason for the call. If you pull the OSHA complaints now, I can talk to Thomas. We'll get you placed somewhere. Quietly. No fuss. And there it was. The buyout offer disguised as mercy. I took a long breath, leaned back in my chair, and finally spoke. Justin, I said, voice calm but steady. If that building collapses in 5 years because of the garbage you signed off on, the blood won't be on my hands. It'll be on yours. He went quiet, dead air, then tried to spin again. Let's not be dramatic, he muttered, but his voice had lost its grip. I ended the call before he could finish. That night, I filed an official police report for the missing tools they never returned. Then I sent a copy of the cease and desist letter to my OSHA contact, labeling it attempted retaliation. If they thought threats would stop me, they had no idea who they were dealing with. They took my job. They tried to erase my voice. What they didn't realize was I was just getting started. 3 days after I told Justin exactly where his guilt would land, the story broke. Whistleblower raises alarms on major construction project in Billings. Front page of the Billings Gazette, with enough carefully worded details that anyone in the industry knew it was about Driftline. And the Riverview site, they didn't use my name, but the quote about systematic safety oversights and falsified records was word for word from one of my emails. I wasn't mad. I was relieved. It meant someone was finally paying attention. The fallout was instant. That very afternoon, OSHA inspectors showed up unannounced at Riverview. Not 1, but 4 of them. Clipboards in hand, vests on, cameras ready. I heard from Frank later that day. They're tearing through everything. Blueprints, materials, logs, even foundation tests. The mood on site shifted from urgency to panic in a matter of hours. And then, out of nowhere, I got an email. Short, formal. The subject line, Opportunity at Bridgewell Contracting. I thought it was spam at first, but when I opened it, I saw a name I hadn't heard in years, Kenneth Vance, owner of Bridgewell, and a man I'd worked with on a school renovation project back in 2006. He'd heard about what I did. He didn't ask questions, just wrote, "We believe in doing things right the first time. Let's talk." That same week, I signed on as senior project manager for Bridgewell's newest build, the East Wing expansion of Billings Memorial Hospital. A real project, high stakes. But this time, with people who gave a damn about safety. Meanwhile, Driftline was falling apart at the seams. The news stirred up public outrage. City officials distanced themselves, pretending they hadn't been lobbied. Thomas Stein released a tone-deaf statement thanking concerned citizens and promising internal review, while trying to pin everything on Justin. But it was too late. Rumor had it Justin was on indefinite leave. Frank said he saw 2 new faces in project management meetings. Guys from corporate flown in to clean up the mess before the site was completely shut down. But they were too slow. The damage was already done. The cracks weren't just in the concrete anymore. They were running straight through the heart of the company. And me? I was back on site. Different hard hat, different banner, same values. I walked those new foundations, with purpose, clipboard under my arm, knowing this time I wasn't patching someone else's shortcuts. I was setting the standard. And for the first time in a long while, I felt proud again. Not just to work, but to lead. 2 months after I walked off the Riverview site with a cardboard box and 30 years of pride crammed inside, I found myself standing in the back of a crowded meeting room at the county courthouse. Suits everywhere, State officials, lawyers, reporters with recorders held up like vultures circling something about to die. The Montana Department of Labor and Industry was holding a press conference, and Driftline Construction was the carcass. On the slab. The commissioner stepped up to the mic, cleared her throat, and didn't waste time. After a thorough investigation, she began, we have determined that Driftline Construction engaged in systemic violations of state building codes and intentionally falsified safety documentation at the Riverview Commercial Complex. That room went silent like someone had cut the air supply. Flashbulbs started popping a second later, and I caught sight of Thomas Stein in the front row, flanked by two grim-faced attorneys. His jaw clenched, sweat beading at his temple. He looked less like a CEO and more like a defendant waiting for a verdict. And he was. Criminal charges are being filed against Mr. Stein and two other Driftline executives, the commissioner continued, for knowingly endangering worker safety and public welfare through fraudulent practices. And just like that, the company that once acted like I was the problem was now a headline for corporate corruption. No more carefully worded PR statements. No more scapegoating Justin. The state was coming for the entire executive branch, and there was no spin strong enough to save them. Gregory Stein, God bless him, had gone all in. He'd turned over every document, every off-the-record payment, every email chain that proved this wasn't negligence. It was orchestrated deception. With his help, the state attorney general launched a broader probe into municipal bribery and zoning fraud tied to Driftline's campaign donations. The scandal ballooned overnight. Within days, Driftline's shareholders voted to dissolve the company completely. Lawsuits piled in, former employees, subcontractors, even tenants, who had signed pre-leases for Riverview. The site was shut down indefinitely. The skeletal frame of that cursed building stood like a tombstone for all their lies. I didn't cheer. There was no fist pump or smug grin. But I stood a little straighter. Not out of vengeance, but vindication. For everyone who said I was too old, too slow, too rigid. For every woman in a hard hat who's ever been talked over, dismissed, or told she was overreacting. Justice didn't knock politely. It kicked the damn door in. And for once, the right people were on the other side of it. 6 months later, I stood at the edge of a freshly poured foundation, the sun barely rising over the horizon, casting long shadows across the steel and rebar. The job site was calm, purposeful. No chaos, no shortcuts, no shouting matches over cut corners. This was the new Billings Memorial Hospital East Wing, and this time we were building it right from the ground up. My nameplate now read Senior Project Manager, Bridgewell Contracting, but titles didn't mean much to me anymore. What mattered was the crew, my crew. Frank was back at my side as electrical superintendent, calm and steady like always. Donna was running procurement, sharp as ever, and finally getting the credit she deserved. We weren't just rebuilding a structure. We were rebuilding trust in how this industry could work when people gave a damn. After work, I still came home to the same house I'd parked in front of the day Driftline tossed me aside like I was nothing. The only difference? That leaky roof we'd been putting off for years? My husband and I replaced it ourselves, one shingle at a time. No contractors, no drama. Just evenings on the ladder, cold beers and quiet pride. It reminded me of why I ever got into construction in the first place. Because there's something deeply satisfying about making things strong enough to last. A few weeks ago, a junior engineer, first job out of college, pulled me aside during a break and asked if I ever regretted what I did. Blowing the whistle, losing my job, the fallout. I didn't hesitate. I'd do it again, I told her, eyes on the rising frame of the hospital. Because there are things you walk away from. And then there are things that, if you stay silent, you become part of the rot. She nodded, and I could tell it landed. So if you've ever been told you're too old, too stubborn, too difficult for doing the right thing, don't back down. Let the truth speak louder than the title on your badge. And if this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button, like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear if you've ever faced a moment like mine, and how you came out standing taller on the other side. Some stories aren't just about revenge. They're about refusing to disappear quietly.